even some of my favorite books of all time are books that I've come to love after reading so much of it and really falling into the story and growing attached to the characters. However, there are those really special books that I know from page one that I'm going to love. So today I thought it'd be fun to look at some of the books that I fell in love with from page one. First on up, we have a book that I've not talked about for a while, and that is Along the Razor's Edge by Rob J. Hayes. Now, I was looking for a book to read, as one does. And in particular, I was looking for a new audiobook, and I wanted to try Rob J. Hayes' work. However, if I wanted to buy a physical, I wanted to buy his big release, which he's really known for, Never Die. That's kind of his highest rated or most rated book. So I thought, I think I'm going to love that book, so I'll buy a physical copy of Never Die when I want to read it. So let's try out one of his other series. So I decided to grab Along the Razor's Edge on audiobook, with the plan to listen to the entire series on audio and hopefully enjoy it, but I wasn't planning on buying physicals unless I really, really loved it. And well, I remember listening to is it a prologue or chapter one? Prologue. It is definitely a prologue. I was listening to the prologue and I just fell in love with this character. Eska is really what drew me into this series. She's just such a vivid and well-realized character. She's very angsty, very chip in her shoulder, but she's so fun to read about, and she has such a strong voice in this series, and that comes through straight away. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about the prologue is you do get a bit of the magic system. It has a really cool magic system where people can ingest these gem things that are called sources, and each of them kind of have their own abilities. But most people only have not affliction. What's the word I'm looking for? Affinity. That's the word I'm looking for. Most people only have an affinity to some sources. Meaning if they ingest one that they do not have an affinity for, it means that they can't really access the magic and it drains away their body and soul, and they can only keep the sources in their stomach for a certain length of time. And that was all really well done and not over-explained in the prologue. So immediately I was like, okay, good writing, really strong character voice, cool magic system. I am sold. And from there, I just fell in love with this story. So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. And I do highly recommend the audiobooks. It's narrated by Moira Quirk, who is one of my favorite audiobook narrators of all time. She also did Blood Over Brighthaven. She's so good, but also the Felix Ortiz art, stunning, so I had to grab the hard copies as well. Great series. Next on up, we have Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. Now this has such a cool opening. The prologue, again, I think is a prologue. No, it's a chapter one. Chapter one has such a strong opening for this book. It is brutal. It's fascinating. It draws you immediately in with these people running across this lake to try and escape from this very strange force called the Blight, which is like a infection in the air, kind of, that unravels people. Visually unravels people with their blood and guts and everything kind of is gross, but it is an amazing, really interesting visual and a brutal way to open up the first chapter of your book, with these people trying to escape from this blight. What's also really interesting about Blood Over Brighthaven is that opening is kind of the most action part of the book. The rest of it's a lot more scholarly. However, that action sort of chapter one does a really good job of setting up this really dark undertone throughout the entire narrative of this blight and really how messed up some of the world is. And we follow two main characters, Siona, who is a scholar who's trying to become a head sorcerer in this world, which is really uncommon because they do not normally accept women. Except for every 10 years, they let one woman take the entrance exam to see if she is able to get in and become one of these sorcerers. So there's lots of built-in misogyny into the magic side of things in this world, but there's also this race of people who are treated as slaves who live outside of the city, but a lot of them flee to the city to escape from this blight, but then they kind of become the slaves and people who are really looked down upon. I love this book. It was terrific, and chapter 1 did such a good job of getting me excited to read it. It really was. From page 1, I was like, oh, I'm going to like this. I'm really going to like this. And I did. Next on up, we go all the way back to 2020, the end of 2020, which was not a great year in a lot of ways. However, one of the really good things for me personally was that I fell back in love with reading. That all began with the Final Empire, which there's some wordplay in there with a joke about it being the final, but also the start. But I'm not even going to try to come up with one. I have talked about this before, so I will make this a little bit of a faster version. However, in 2020, I really wanted to get back into reading, and the first thing I did was fall back on some of my favorites as a kid. So I read a Rick Riordan book, which I did really like, but I was ready for more adult fantasy, and I started watching booktube with people like Murphy Napier and Daniel Green, and you can't really escape the name Brandon Sanderson and Mistborn when you're talking about sort of entry fantasy books. So I picked up the Final Empire, and I remember very visually with this lord talking to someone and ashes falling from the sky. I just knew immediately that I was going to enjoy it. There was something about it that just immediately captured my imagination. I also remember another scene about 10-15% into the book where Vin, the main character, is sitting in a room, and one by one other members of this main cast start coming into the room, and it just reminded me of the scene in The Hobbit, or was it Lord of the Rings? No, it was The Hobbit, of the dwarfs arriving and just being introduced to them kind of one by one. And I know tonally that doesn't make any sense. The scene is very different, but that's just all I could think of during that scene. And I went, oh, okay, I'm obsessed already. I'm going to love this book. And I did. Really threw me back into adult fantasy. And this channel probably wouldn't exist without this book. So it means a lot to me, and I loved it from page 1. Now, I know a lot of people are not a huge fan of this author because of their release schedule. However, I couldn't not include Name of the Wind. I mean, the prologue for Name of the Wind is just iconic. And I remember reading it. I tried other books with more purple prose in the past, and they just didn't work for me. And then I read this one, and just the writing style I fell in love with. And I absolutely loved the prologue, and I knew immediately that I was going to enjoy the book. It's just so incredibly impressive how Patrick Rothfuss really captures tone and atmosphere and just this really impactful and immersive prologue in such small word count. I think it's only a page long, A Silence in Three Parts. Okay, and this edition is a page and a tiny little bit, but I think in the other edition I had, it was just a page long. So that's incredibly impressive, and it just sets up the tone so well. And at that time, I just hadn't read anything like it. I just remember reading it and thinking, is this what prose can be like? It made me, even as a writer, really want to improve my craft. And I remember doing a lot of research into just how he does it, and just to nerd out a little bit, because I did some research into why some of his writing and that type of book just sounds so cool in comparison to others. And apparently, one of the main reasons, or one of the big reasons, is using more Latin-based words rather than Germanic-based words. So just on average, he's using more Latin-based words over Germanic words, which is not the only reason why his prose works so well, but is one of the reasons. And I just thought that was interesting. But whenever first pages or prologues or anything like that turns up, I'm always going to mention Name of the Wind, just because it is an incredible piece of writing. Next on up, we have The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. Now again, this was one of those almost formative books in my adult fantasy reading beginning. Not long after reading the Mistborn trilogy and some other books, I was moving back to booktube and looking for more recommendations, and I think it was Murphy Napier who first mentioned The Ember Blade. I think she was reading it at the time, so I got the paperback and I read the prologue, and again, I don't even think it's that insane a prologue. It's not super twisty or turny, but it is the prose style. It is beautifully written. Chris Wooding does a terrific job of writing almost lyrically, but not metaphorically. So it's not over the top or very metaphorical or purple, but it's still very lyrical and beautifully written. And I really, really like that. And you can tell pretty quickly that that writing style is there, and I knew that I was going to really enjoy it. And the Ember Blade is often compared to Lord of the Rings, which I agree with in a lot of ways. It is very similar, especially in structure. And it does have these types of characters that are kind of like the Nazgul, and one of those were there. And it also had this almost Mayan-like temple description, so I thought it was a really interesting setting. And I just remember reading it and going, oh, I'm going to love this. And I did. It's still one of my favorite books of all time. I really, really enjoyed this. And if you haven't read it, what are you doing? Go read it. Stop watching this video. Just turn it off right now. Cut off your family, your friends, your work, your social life, everything. Sleep, food, you don't need them. You need the Ember Blade. And then you can go back to those other things after, maybe. I just love the classic fantasy feeling interwoven with this more modernized, but also very lyrical prose style. The cast of characters is awesome. I love the main two, Aaron and Cade, and their friendship is so wholesome. It's amazing. Vika and kind of her backstory and where she comes from, and these sort of wild old sorcerers is such a cool part of the narrative. And also Grub, who is just a terrific character that I don't want to talk about too much because he has really cool stuff in this book and I don't want to ruin it, but he's great. Grub Club forever. I had a blast, and just talking about this in this video, it makes me want to reread it right now. So if that isn't high praise, I don't know what is. I highly recommend it if you've not already read it. And if you have already read it, read it again. Okay? Now, I really think that our experience with books is very dependent on the time that we come across them. It just depends on what you've read before, what's currently going on with you in your life, and just there's so many different elements. Even the day that you pick it up, you could have a different experience than if you waited a day and read it the day after. And it's all chaos. It's all chaos theory, and who knows if it will make a massive difference. But I do genuinely believe that some books just come along at the right time. And for me, one of those books was Ninth House. I just punched my shelf. Ow. By Leah Bardugo. Now, I really, really enjoyed this because I'd read a lot of high fantasy and I really wanted to try some urban fantasy. And I heard about this and there was a lot of hype around it before it released because Leah Bardugo was huge in the more YA space with her Shadow and Bone trilogy, but also the Six of Crows duology, which I believe leans slightly more into adult, but I think this was officially her first debut into adult fantasy. So there was a lot of hype around it when it came out, and I thought, why not? Let's give it a go. And I remember just falling in love with the prologue, following Alex. It opens with her kind of further into the story and then jumps back in chapter 1 and to move to how she got to that point. And I thought that was just such a good way of telling this story because the prologue really got the wheels turning for the intrigue and the setup for Alex as a character and how she's going to get into this horrible situation that she's in the prologue. This kind of has sort of murder mystery type elements with secret societies as Alex joins Yale University to join this ninth house, looking after the 8 other houses of magic. But even with the modern day mysteries of this murder that happens, and some other things I don't want to spoil, we also have Alex's past that only really gets hints at towards the start, and then we learn more and more about how she came to join the ninth house, which is fascinating. It really is a multi-layered story, and I think Alex is a terrific character. She's really what drew me into this, and I could tell straight away from page 1 that I was going to have a blast with it. I think partly because I was really wanting something different, so urban fantasy just scratched that itch. But it doesn't matter why. It just matters that it really meant a lot to me when I picked it up and I really, really enjoyed it. So, highly recommend. Still a terrific book and I really need to read the sequel because I love this. I need to read Hellbent, which is right there. Which I heard is also really good. So, Looking forward to reading that. And those are some of the books that I fell in love with from page 1. So let me know down in the comments below, what books did you know you were going to love just by the first page? And if you want to see some of the most intimidating books on my TBR, check out this video here. Thank you very much for watching. Now, I really believe that books